and gentlemen, dear guests, hello live from Chicago, from DWIH's Future Forum, and welcome to The Show Must Go On Line, Before and After Virtual Theater. I'm Eva Bosbach, Executive Director of the North America Office of the University of Cologne. Our university is located in Germany, in the beautiful city of Cologne, that you might know for its famous Gothic cathedral. It is my great pleasure to welcome you to our hybrid lunch session, which is part of the Future Forum, a conference created by the German Center for Research and Innovation, New York, DWIH. This year's topic, Before and After, invites German and American researchers, scientists, entrepreneurs, innovators, and experts to discuss how work and lives have changed throughout the course of the COVID-19 pandemic and share their outlook on the future. Before we begin, I would like to tell you just a little bit about the University of Cologne. Our university is one of the oldest universities in Europe. It has been founded 1388, and it is also one of the largest universities in Germany, with currently about 51,000 students and many international student researchers. The University of Cologne is ranked among the best research universities in Germany, with 4 so-called clusters of excellence, bringing innovation and new insights on topics from quantum matter and quantum materials, economics and aging research to plant sciences and food security. Today's session features research from our Faculty of Arts and Humanities, which offers a wide variety on subject and degree programs and also maintains many international partnerships. One of these was established by one of our speakers today, Professor Dr. Peter Marx, Professor of Theater and Media Culture at the University of Cologne and Director of one of the largest theater collections worldwide. The theater collection, Theaterwissenschaftliche Sammlung, at the University of Cologne offers students and researchers extensive literature and materials of European theater history, ranging from reviews and photographs to original stage and costume design. In our session today, we want to take a look at how the pandemic changed the very core of what defines us as humans, our culture. The arts and culture sectors all over the world have suffered immense consequences of the pandemic, with theaters closing for months and sometimes forever. While some of the larger companies have reopened last month, recently, such as the New York Broadway last month, many of the smaller organizations are still struggling to get back on their feet. Over the last 1.5 years, performers, directors, designers, and marketing experts have to come up with various creative solutions to engage with us, the audience. Because theater as we knew it depends on sharing a space together, experiences performances through our body, being moved to tears, to laughs, to goosebumps by what we see and hear live in front of us. So let's talk about the changes that moving theater into the digital world has brought to the industry and to the individual, what strategies theaters have adopted to bring performances into our homes, and what future theater and performances might look like. Who are our experts? Professor Dr. Peter Marx is joining us today from Cologne to discuss insights from a joint project with our partner university, Northwestern University in Evanston, just close to here in Chicago. Together with Professor Tracy Davis, who unfortunately can't join us today due to a family emergency, he established the Summer Institute Cologne, which took place in Cologne every year from 2013 to 2019 and brought together students and researchers of theater and media culture and other disciplines to discuss developments in theater study. In 2020, the summer school, as a response to life and education moving online, formed into a consortium of 6, joining forces with 4 other universities across the globe to take a deep look at the changes that virtual theater brings nationally and internationally. 2 of the students of this project, Keary and from Northwestern University and Annabell from the University of Cologne, are with me here in Chicago. And I also want to thank Annabell for designing this session. Welcome to all our speakers. Thank you everyone for joining us here in Chicago or online from your home. And thank you to the DWIH for having us. One last technical note. We would love it if you could join our session and submit questions to our speakers. For this, you can either go to the participant section on the right bottom corner of your screen find your name and select raise hand and unmute later. Or you can also type your question in the chat. So, Professor Marx, the pandemic went global, and so did the Cologne Summer Institute, including universities from 4 continents. What were the main takeaways from your discussions among the Consortium of Six? What were maybe the most interesting examples of virtual theater that you have discussed, and which were some of the changes of theater in the digital realm that you identified as such an international group?
Yeah, thank you very much for the opportunity to talk about the Summer Institute or the Consortium of Six in this context. And please allow me to start with a disappointment, because we had so many plans for 2020. And actually, we had formed the Consortium of Six, which included partners from Chile, from Ghana, from Israel, from India, the United States, and Germany, to bring them together in person for the Theater der Welt, the Theater of the World Festival, which was planned for Düsseldorf last summer. So going virtual was an attempt to save or to rescue some of this initiative to bring together students, artists, and scholars from different theatrical backgrounds, from different cultures in one place, and bring them into a dialogue. And allow me another sort of introducing remark at the beginning, because coming from Germany, I was humbled at so many points, because Germany, by comparison, was so lucky with the pandemic, but also with the political effort to save the cultural landscape. I think this is something we really have to understand, that the publicly subsidized and publicly supported broad art scene in Germany sort of really was in quite a good start by comparison with our friends in many, many other countries. So before we talked about theater, one of the side effects of this Consortium of Six was really to share a room and to experience the pandemic in its different registers and facets from all over the continent. And I think this gave to all of us a very different approach to what it meant to go through such a global crisis. And I'm very grateful for the persistence and also for the stamina of our international colleagues who carried on through this project. I really admire that and was deeply grateful for sharing this experience. And I think to a certain extent, this also changed our perspective on what performance and theater means as a shared social and cultural space, what it meant to sort of try to make an effort to come together, even if we couldn't come together in person for such a long period since then. So we started with a kind of three-part approach. In the first segment of our seminar program, we had invited curators who actually had created festivals that brought together artists in person, and to hear of their experiences, to also understand the loss that comes with this impossibility to come together in person was truly important. In the second and third phase of this seminar, we made an experiment, and here I'm very grateful that Annabell and Keary are with us today, because as participants of the seminars, they truly were important contributors.
The virtual event.
Yeah.
We ask our students
virtually joining the thing that's like going on right now.
I'm hearing voices. I hope you do too. Because in the second phase, we started with asking the students to create a virtual festival, and sort of to encourage them to think creatively on their respective cultural background, but also on the possibility, how can we bring the experience of theater and performance, you know, with all that is lost by virtual get-togethers, but how could we bring as much as possible to this new format? And I think maybe we can ask Keary and Annabell a little bit to talk about this experience of getting into the mode of curating a virtual festival, and sort of also thinking through what does it mean to think of a global virtual space in mixed cultural groups.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Yeah, let's continue. Would you like to start?
Actually, I think that
you might be the right person to talk with, because what we did to curate this festival was that I think we might have had 30 graduate students from across these 6 universities, but we split into small groups that had representatives from all of the different institutions. And I remember your group being particularly active in the online chat. So maybe you want to talk about how you all worked together to curate and make the choice that you made for the festival.
And I'll come back to you then. No worries.
I'm not dodging, but you guys did do a lot.
Sure, thank you. No, definitely. It was a very interesting experience for us as theater students, because we hadn't worked together internationally in that kind of sense before. So it was really a process of negotiating how we're actually going to communicate among each other. And that is the case, obviously, in every kind of that you share internationally. That is always the case, that you have to kind of find common ground to discuss. But then, especially for theater students, it is very interesting to share performances online. So we had to set up like meetings to watch theater online together, and actually, you know, find something that can connect us together as a group through the theater. And I know that, for example, our group had like this little WhatsApp chat going. We posted like little messages to each other, what we were feeling throughout the performance, just so that we had some kind of, so we didn't want to have like another Zoom talk going on next to the virtual theater that we were watching, but we had to find some sort of strategy to engage together and to kind of bridge what is lost in digital theater as well. And it was interesting because we found we were searching for international companies that would really grab something for everyone. So some performances that we initially had in mind were very specific for nations, like for the outcome of the pandemic in the specific nation. And we felt like this didn't resonate with everyone in the group. So we really had to find maybe the core of theater, really, that connects with everybody. And in the end, we found a perfect example, like 2 perfect examples actually, from Israel and Chile. The Chilean performance, for example, was from a theater company who was doing a performance with disabled people, and they moved online and had like a Zoom performance live in front of us, actually, as a group. And this, interaction and direct connection really connected with everyone for us.
Mm-hmm. Great. Well, we hear that many of the new moments and new strategies really grew out of disappointment and necessity, as you said, Professor Marx, and then were powered so far by the persistence, as you said, and the creativity that was propelled, and then the necessary new creative strategies of how to engage still and keep going. So Keary, that brings us to kind of a different area a little bit, but very related. From your perspective as a student or a young researcher also, but also of course as an audience member and consumer of art, what were the most exciting new strategies of theater companies that you observed to engage with audiences during the pandemic?
I'm the type of theater goer that obviously I love the sociability of going to the theater, but also I like to sort of sit down and when the lights be lowered, not notice other people or have myself be noticed. And so I think what was exciting and surprising about this was that, as you kind of alluded to in talking about how your group watched theater and communicated on WhatsApp, was that it provided forms of communication while performance was happening that I had not been used to before. For example, with the Israeli production that Annabell mentioned, this production was originally designed to be performed in person in a classroom, but since we were doing this over Zoom, the theater company remade the performance to like Zoom learning, like you were taking classes in a high school or junior high school on Zoom. And I remember it started off with a drama class, and the teacher was talking to us about Sophocles' Antigone, which is, a story of revolution, of speaking back to power. And this teacher was silenced by the administration, which led to an uproar. watching on Zoom. And so we're using the chat function to call out the administrators, and we're sending all of the emojis and speaking back to each other in ways that I never experienced in an in-person theater event. So I get to answer your question in a kind of more succinct ways, that it provided points of connection that in-person theater, in my experience, just had. And it was also really cool to see how theater companies actively revised their repertoire for Zoom, this new platform.
Mm-hmm. Well, theater is about acting and actors and interacting with the audience, right? So let's talk about actors for a bit. Annabell, these theater acting strategies and techniques usually depend on the feedback from the audience, right? So how does this change in front of the camera?
I mean, very much. I'm sure Professor Marx has a lot to say to that as well. More of an expert on the technique as well. I just want to mention, it would be great if you could mute yourself so that we have a perfect audio for everyone. So acting techniques really depend on finding the core of energy in yourself, usually like theater acting. And the way that theater and film acting have been divided, that's actually quite a new process. So what was seen during the pandemic was really that theater actors had to come up with filming techniques, or techniques for film actors, and had to actually accommodate this, which they had never done before, maybe. And it was really interesting because there was like a gap, or a divide as well between like bigger companies who were used to broadcast their performances. We, for example, have the Consortium Opera broadcasting theater in London. That was the year before, and they were they were kind of used to act for cameras as well. But for small companies, for example, the Israeli company, they really had to rethink everything from the beginning, really, and they had to come up with completely new solutions.
Yeah, absolutely. New forms of communications, new forms of solutions. Even for us right now, here we hear steps, somebody walking while listening to our talk. If you could unmute, that would be fantastic. I mean, mute, that's what I'm going to say. Fantastic. I would like to open the floor to questions from our audience. You can raise your hand, you can unmute yourself to speak. You can type your question in the chat while people are thinking about the question. Professor Marx, you are welcome to comment on anything that's been said. And I also have a question about the shared space. So developing a theater play used to be fixed to sharing a space with other creatives and bouncing of ideas and concepts from one another. So to you as a university professor, and Keary, you also spoke about the kind of college similarity. This might be actually similar to how we used to share a room for classes or lectures in a university. So is there something that maybe we as a society can learn from the strategies that theater makers have adapted to create kind of a sense of a togetherness despite the situation?
I think I would like to add one point, because when I was preparing my notes for tonight, I sort of came across this very astonishing Chilean puppetry production, which was made in small boxes. And in a very interesting way, the aesthetic of this production fitted extremely well to the Zoom format. And it was an astonishing session, how the performers did not only show the performance, but also were willing to share how they did it. So I remember how the performer, how she was dismantling her box and how she was sort of telling all the tricks. And I think this is one of the experiences made out of this digital situation, the willingness and the readiness of artists to share, quote unquote, their secrets in order to reach out and to create a community that sort of helps to understand different aesthetic forms. And I also felt that there's a side effect of this digital theater, which touches on something that I felt was very present in these months of the pressing pandemic, and that is the ability to mourn, to understand what we are missing. I mean, sort of, to a certain extent, we were also busy to pretend that we are good at digital teaching, that we sort of know what we are doing. But sort of the performative experience clearly was also about something we are missing, something that sort of is at loss at the moment. And it's interesting, if you speak to artists and performers these days, they sometimes are disappointed because audiences aren't pouring back to the extent you would expect. But it seems we have to learn to get back to, we have to learn to get out of our comfort zone and sort of to repopulate these public spaces that sort of are so important to us as a society. And maybe that's a little bit, that's a weird answer to your question, but sort of to me, it feels like this really is an important element in what we could take away from this experiment that we did.
Yeah, and it is a good answer. I feel like how to recreate togetherness. What you mentioned, dismantling the box, sharing our secrets, maybe also showing some vulnerabilities we see in other meetings. We see the kids, we see the pets, we see some human side of the workforce, and there is new aspects, and there is of course a lot of missing. But as you say, learning to get back together. We have now 2 questions from the audience. I would like to start with Karen Elliott. She is speaking to your comments, Professor Marx. The medium is the message, right? She says, in what other ways did this new medium of the virtual environment push the boundaries of what can be communicated through theater?
I think to a certain extent it might be too early to try to give general responses to such a broad question. I felt sort of that it helps us to rethink the categories in which we think of theater and performance. Do I make this noise? Is that appropriate?
No, I think we have one new person who just joined us.
So,
yeah, you continue. Go ahead, please.
Okay, I felt, or I feel sort of that. I mean, theater always has been about storytelling. It has been about the performative aspect. It has been about different form of actors, be it puppets, be it objects, be it human beings. And I think sort of the virtual medium forced us to reconsider these categories and invent some strategies to make strong points at other moments. As I said, like the puppetry, the theater in a box that clearly has a very different allure when it's performed live. But it gains some sharpness to the moment through the virtual medium. So, I mean, usually I'm working mainly as a theater historian, and one of the things I learned as a theater historian is the theater is much more than we thought it was. I mean, sort of, it really is polyphonic. It has different forms, and sort of going back to the plurality of options, I think, is something we were forced to do, and I hope we'll be able to carry that through.
Yeah, I think we all hope that. I have one other question from the audience, and maybe Keary and Annabell, you want to take on that. Will the profession, from Catherine Di Paula, will the profession of theater acting and acting education change with more hybrid formats as you're closer to film and TV while still maintaining the art of theater? I know also in Cologne, the theater studies, right, are closely connected to media culture studies. So maybe one of you would like to comment on this?
Yeah, maybe I'm going to start, and you can maybe share a little bit of an international perspective on that as well, because I think it is very different in every country. So theater, acting, and the education that you get is very, very specific for every country. And for example, in Germany, it is very we have like a lot of process that you go through, and a lot of formalized classes that you take. And it's interesting because you mentioned that we're a Media and Culture Institute at the University of Cologne, because these these media, they overlap so much. We have, as I mentioned, the broadcasting of some theatre companies, and we have a lot of theatre actors also going into film and TV industries as well. So it's really interesting for me at the University of Cologne just to find these overlaps and find how these two very different media in their history, but also very closely together, connected, how these really have their very specific differences, and where these moments are that you can really pinpoint every difference that you find really. But yeah, I mean, I guess that's really just we will see about that, right? How theatre acting will change. Maybe you want to share a national perspective on that, or how is it in the US?
I think in the US, my experience is limited to that, but I think that students and the act of teaching acting requires a kind of co-presence, right? It's about how you're able to connect with other people in a shared space. So for that reason alone, I feel like there might be a bit of hesitancy to really turn to the virtual for education. But what I do think will probably happen and what will be cool is that all of the skills that artists have had to learn during the pandemic in order to survive and keep going, all these virtual skills with virtual technology, I imagine we'll see a lot more mixed media, a lot more productions of theater and performance that bring in televisual, the filmic, visual art, objects, all kinds of really neat stuff. I just spent a week in New York seeing shows, and half the shows I saw were some type of multimedia event. So I think that's what's really exciting and what could potentially be great about what we've learned as artists from the pandemic.
Thank you. We're almost at the end of our time. We only have time for one last question. I would like to go to you, Professor Marx, once again, and to your group. Over the course of the pandemic, maybe, and looking at the theatrical landscape in the US and in Germany, what were some changes or maybe some surprises that you saw, good ones? Where did you see innovation? And we are here at the Future Forum, right? Looking in the future, what do you think we will see more and more digital theater in the future? You mentioned mixed media, objects, and so on. What do you think? Where is the future?
I mean, there's also a lot of bad theater. Just saying it for the sake of complexity. I mean, sort of, and I think it's interesting what Keary and Annabell were saying is sort of theater, if it tries to communicate through the digital channels, it has to make an effort. It's not about filming performances. I mean, sort of that has a documentary quality and that can be of interest, but I think what we see is, on the one hand, performers and groups that sort of really are excited to experiment with these forms of interactivity, of simultaneity on a very complex level, on reaching out to a global audience. And yet at the same time, we see sort of regained appreciation for traditional forms of theater. I mean, sort of one of the highly praised performances in the German-speaking sphere at the Salzburg Festival this summer was a 5-hour performance of Henry VI and Richard III, which was traditional actors' theater on a bare stage, which was exciting to be back in a room with an audience and to see an actor acting. So I as a scholar, but also as a theater enthusiast, I don't believe sort of in narratives of radical change, of what will happen, how will the future be. I think if the pandemic has taught us something, it's a sensitivity of appreciation. It's a sensitivity towards the pluralistic potentialities of what theater and performance can be. And I hope we are able to carry this through. And yet at the same time, and I'm saying this as a university teacher, as well as a scholar and a theater goer, I really hope that we don't lose our eagerness to expose ourselves to direct contact and direct meetings. I mean, sort of, I was happy that we're able to save this Consortium of Six through the medium of Zoom, but I also share very dear moments of co-presence with Keary, who was a participant in our summer school the years before. And I think sort of this is what the ultimate mission of a university is, of sort of creating an intellectual space, but that also comes with the necessity to expose ourselves to different environments, to different cultures, and sort of to real travel. So it's not a localic argument, it's an intellectual argument that I hope we will be able to travel soon again.
Yeah, I like this hope. And you mentioned appreciation. That's actually a perfect ending to our session, because we have to end because we have another group coming in. So thank you all for coming to The Show Must Go Online, Before and After Virtual Theater, brought to you by the University of Cologne, New York office, and the DWIH New York, live from Chicago here. Thank you, Professor Marx. Thank you, Annabell. Thank you, Keary. Thank you all for being with us, and enjoy your day.
Thank you so much.